what we're doing this year in partnership with Ian and Matt from Success Methods, who I'm going to hand over to very, very shortly, is we all believe that we should feed the communities that we serve. So we've been running this series of value-added content, really for you guys, for leaders in customer success. So if you're new to this, we have got a little bit of a structure. I'll just quickly run through it and I'll hand over so people can do their introductions. But just very, very briefly, this is a 3-part series and this is the final chapter. Back in August, we ran a webinar on how to align your organization for customer success. So it's really about how to integrate and how to get everyone on board from all the different departments across the business. That is pre-recorded. It is available. You can either contact myself or I'm sure Ian. We've got it on our websites if you want to catch up afterwards and watch that. Then in September, we ran a second webinar on measurement. So it's really with a real focus on customer value, what you should be measuring and looking at the outcomes for success. And then today, it's really about bringing all of that knowledge together and then how we can turn customer success into a real revenue engine for the business. So that's why we're doing this. I'm going to quickly hand over to my partner in crime, Miss Gemma Butler, and she can introduce herself and tell you a little bit about the format for today.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. As Rob said, I'm the other director at 90,000 Hours, and yeah, this is the third one, so thanks everyone for coming. I'm going to be fielding your questions today, so you can use the chat or the Q&A, we don't mind, chat's probably easier. Just to say that it will all be completely confidential, so you can ask anything you like. It really is your chance to get an expert opinion from Matt and Ian, so just fire away. And thanks for attending.
Thank you, Gemma. Yes, so guys, do fire in any questions you've got into the chat. So if you hover your mouse down to the bottom of your screen, if you're unfamiliar with Zoom, which is unlikely, but if you hover your mouse at the bottom, there'll be a little button saying chat, and you can just fire in a question there, and it will just be seen by us panelists. Do fire in anything you want. Ian, I'm going to pass over to you to make a quick intro.
Thank you very much, Rob. Welcome, everybody. Oops. I think some of you might be joining us for the third time, some perhaps for the second and some for the first, so welcome to everybody. As Rob has briefly said, my name is Ian Robson. I am the director at Success Methods, so started a couple of years ago. It's a consulting company that provides training and coaching and consulting services for customer-facing teams, primarily customer success-facing teams. And Matt is one of my colleagues who works with me on a variety of the offerings that we provide. Matt, do you want to say a couple of words?
Yeah, thanks, Ian. Delighted to be here. As Ian said, work alongside Ian at Success Methods and have about 15 years experience in customer success. So looking forward to helping Gemma field some of the questions and chipping in with some answers as we go.
Okay. Excellent. Thank you, guys. Okay, so let's get started. Let's go straight in. And what we'll do, guys, is we have got a few pit stops for questions, but we will also be answering questions at the end. So we're going to try and run through this in about 40 minutes, which leaves 10-15 minutes at the end for questions. But do feel free that you can contribute throughout and ask questions. But without further ado, I'll hand over to Ian and off we go.
Great, thank you, Rob. So we're going to go through 2 or 3 topics. What's the customer success revenue engine? What do we actually mean by that, or what do I mean by that? What's the potential? I think that's maybe a really interesting area. There's nothing groundbreaking there, but we have a nice way of really explaining the potential of customer success to really drive revenues. Then we'll look in a bit more detail at where you could look in your organization and some of the things that you could do to start improving your ability to be a revenue engine within a customer success function or within your organization, and then finish off with just a couple of things on actually making that a practical reality. So some fairly, I think, straightforward content and some potentially challenging content. So please do ask questions as we go along. Matt and Jem will moderate, and we'll stop now and then for a bit of a chat about some of them. So those of you who've been on this journey with us in the past might well have seen this. It's what we call the customer success equation. And really, for me, everything starts with delivering value to satisfied customers. And if you do that well, what should result is all the things that you and your employer want to see. So increased retention rates, expansion, usage, if you're a usage-based organization, in the way that you commercialize, and advocacy, which obviously is critical for new business sales. So we think there are probably 4 areas where a customer success team can positively impact, or if things aren't going effectively, negatively impact. So obviously you can drive up retention, you can reduce churn is the other way of saying that, by ensuring your customers really are seeing the value and the return on the investment from their investment with you. If they are, they're far, far more likely to renew. So having a great framework, a great customer success framework is a huge help there. Sales is an obvious area, not one that every customer success team considers or isn't involved in, I think. But we think customer success can influence certainly expansion revenues. There's no question about that. You can prospect and identify opportunities, pass them to the sales part of the company. You can also contribute to new business sales cycles. So I've worked in lots of places where customer success bring their expertise, they bring their knowledge of the product, they bring their knowledge of how it's used to high value add interventions in a new business sales cycle. Not to make customer success salespeople for 1 second, but used very strategically, particularly on large opportunities, they can add a great deal of value in the sales cycle as well. We'll also talk about advocacy, which is another big area where customer success can help to drive revenue. Usage, so we're seeing this more and more. I had a conversation just 2 days ago with a coaching client about their model, which is very much usage-based. So their customers pay them when they do something successfully on the platform. They don't pay a subscription, they pay for results. I think that's a really interesting model. And obviously you are there as a vendor, massively incentivized, not just to get the renewal by whatever means necessary. You're actually massively incentivized to drive usage on the platform, because without it, you don't make any revenue. So that really gives you huge skin in the game, I think, if you're a usage-based vendor or usage-based model that you use. And again, you know, great customer success is going to drive that up. Poorer customer success or ineffective customer success is potentially going to leak out some revenue and the small. And of course, services. You may monetize some of your services. So I've seen customer success teams with premium offerings. So you may bring revenue direct to the organization. And of course, indirect revenues by delivering opportunities to your training teams, your consulting teams. You can again bring lots of revenue into the organization by being the team that spots, perhaps warms up, and then hands over the opportunities to other parts of the organization to deliver services. So there's a wide range of areas where you as a customer success team can contribute. Obviously, retention is why we're all here. That's why we were here in the first place. But sales, services, and if you're usage-based, driving product usage are all key areas where customer success can absolutely drive revenue for an organization. So for me, that's the basis of the revenue engine. There's enormous opportunity for customer success teams to find ways to drive revenue in an organization. So as is our wont, we like to do a few polls, make sure everybody's kind of contributing to what we're learning on the webinar. So just wanted to ask you today, having seen those 4, and you may not fit perfectly into this, but there's a limit to the number of things we can have on the poll. How would you describe your recognized contribution to revenue at your employer today? So I'm particularly interested in the things that you have a KPI for, or you're specifically measured on as a team around the way you bring revenue into the organization. So we'll just give you a couple of minutes to vote.
Thanks, Ian, for that good introduction. It's really interesting, that usage model. So are you guys seeing that more and more then with, and are you seeing it more with like newer SaaS companies or quite traditional, quite bigger organizations, or across the board?
I'm bumping into it more commonly, Rob. Certainly this was the people I was speaking to earlier in the week was a new SaaS vendor. And I think it's the ultimate, isn't it? You pay for value essentially in a usage model. So I think it's an interesting future direction for the industry, because ultimately, if we're saying we are about delivering value, then customers are increasingly, I think, going to ask for a model that allows us to work in that way. So it's still not by any means, you know, a dominant mode, but I'm seeing it more and more.
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting pricing model for sure. Okay, guys. Well, if you want to just put in your last vote, just where you're at in terms of your recognised contribution to revenue at the moment, we'll finish the poll up very, very shortly, and then I'll share the results with you. So just give a few more seconds. Gemma, have we had any questions come in at this point? I take that as a no.
No, nothing's come in yet. Sorry. No, nothing yet. Do send in your questions if there's anything that you want to know.
Okay, guys. So here are the results. Let's have a quick look.
So that's pretty fascinating, isn't it? About a third are recognised for just retention, a third for retention and sales. Presumably that's retention and expansion, so net retention. And then a smaller number on the combination of retention and services and retention sales. And 20% not recognised at all for their contribution to revenue, which is interesting, not even on retention. So I had no idea what to expect here. So that's really interesting results. And I hope you all find that little poll to be interesting too. It shows, again, as an industry, we are quite inconsistent in the way that we do things from a measurement perspective.
Yeah.
Okay. Here that poll. So we have what we call the 1% advantage model, and this is really designed just to show how powerful customer success can be, how small of a move you need to make a big impact at your employer and on the numbers. So there are 4 levers. We've talked about them: retention, sales, primarily expansion revenues, usage-based revenues, and advocacy-based revenues. And by advocacy-based revenues, I mean where, as a result of customer success generating case studies, generating references, generating speakers for events, you're able to build pipeline and ultimately convert that into a higher amount of revenue. And that's very hard to track, obviously, but there's definitely a role for customer success to play in that advocacy piece to support the sales organization. So let's just look at one example. Let's look at churn. And what we're looking at here is a company that starts in year 1 with 10 million in ARR, and they're currently losing 10% of their revenue per year, or they're retaining 90%, depending upon the way you look at it. So in 5 years, that company will be down to roughly 6 million in ARR. So by losing what sounds like a relatively small amount, 10% a year, actually you lose nearly half after 5 years. So you're down to 6 million. If you can improve as a team 1% a year, so at the end of year 1, drop 9% instead of 10, end of year 2, you're dropping 8% instead of 10, and so on. So just by making a year-on-year 1% improvement, you end up retaining somewhere around 7 million in revenue. So a full million in ARR is still in the company. But that's not the whole story, of course, because the cumulative effect of that over a 5-year period is nearly 3 million quid in ARR in your business that would not have been there by making a 1% improvement in the way that you are able to retain revenue. Now, what's really interesting about this is 1% is undoubtedly doable on a year-on-year basis for most organizations. If you're starting at 96, yes, it's going to be really hard. You know, if you're already getting a really, really high retention number. But if you're in the 80s or the 90s and set yourself a 1% a year, 1.5%, 2%, it doesn't need to be a big improvement to add up to major numbers over the course of a few years. And of course, customer success teams are not cheap and are often being quizzed on the value that they provide to organizations. And we saw this a lot at the start of the pandemic, where customer success teams were being cut because it wasn't clear to their organizations where the value was. Well, here's a chart that shows you exactly how, by making improvements, you may have to advertise it in advance. It's our plan to go from 90 to 95% over a 5-year period. We think it's doable. Here's how, and this is the results that we would see. you're making a tremendous impact on the organization. And of course, that doesn't just apply to churn. So a 1% improvement on expansion revenues. So let's say we started with 10 million in ARR, and we, rather than expanding it by 10% a year, after which 5 years would be at 16 million, we expanded it by 10, then 11, then 12, then 13, then 14. So again, a 1% improvement in our expansion revenues, we end up on 18.5, and a cumulative improvement of nearly 5 million over the course of a 5-year period. So again, just by making a small improvement annually, a very achievable improvement, over the long run, you can make significant impacts on the company's bottom line. And I'm not going to go into them in a lot of detail, but if you're usage-based, the same is true. And if you can find a way to link your efforts in advocacy to sales in the organization, and there probably is a relationship between the number of case studies or the number of speakers or the number of reference calls done and the overall new business revenue of a company, then by adding to that pool, by being a driver of advocacy, then again, you could potentially look to show how that has a financial impact on your organization. So we're not even going to talk here about services that you can monetize. We're talking only about the recurring revenue aspects of an organization and how really small improvements can be a key lever for customer success to drive significant revenue in an organization. And what this shows us is the perfect illustration of why we have customer success, because in SaaS companies, existing customers are the source of most of your future revenues, and they are potentially a gold mine if you can drive additional revenue out of them over time. And that fundamental shift is what really gave rise to customer success in the first place. So we're just going to quickly jump into a second poll, because I'm really intrigued, having seen that, just to hear from you around, having seen those various ways that even a small improvement can have a big impact on revenue. How would you assess your potential as a customer success leader or customer success team to drive additional revenue for your organization? None, you're doing as much as you can already. Huge, there's a lot of opportunity for you to really get involved here and drive more revenue for your organization.
Thanks, Ian. The numbers don't lie, do they? There is fact in data there, and that's quite eye-opening actually. Just 1% difference, just 1% difference makes such a big impact on the business.
Yeah, it's fast. I stole the idea from Dave Brailsford. That's Team Sky's. That's how they dominated the Tour de France. Well, yeah. hopefully not too many drugs, but that is really how they dominated the Tour de France, with this notion of 1% here, 1% there. Cumulatively, it adds up so quickly. So we've got most of the polls in. I'd love to hear from everybody, because the results are really fascinating, and it's exciting in a way, because what we're seeing here. Perhaps you want to share that, Rob? I'm not sure we're going to get any more in.
Yep, let me share the poll. Thanks, Ian. Let's have a look at the results.
So a full half of you with areas where you can do more, and another third with a huge opportunity to really drive revenue. And for me, that's incredibly exciting. I think if you've got that opportunity, that's a phenomenal place to be, kind of setting out a picture for your executive, setting out a plan, thinking about how you would bite it off, and we'll talk about a bit more of that later, and getting started and hopefully beginning to see the results over time, really demonstrating your value to the organization. I think that's a tremendous opportunity that you all have. So very exciting.
Yeah, for definite. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing that. We'll motor on.
Okay, so we have a little pit stop for questions. I think probably Matt and Gemma have been answering away. Do we have any?
Yeah, we do. We have one that's, Ian, we've got one that's really relevant, I think, at this point. Somebody's asked if you're seeing more companies, or if you're seeing companies now realise the need to invest in customer success as much as looking for new business, say.
Oh, for sure. I mean, I think that's a trend that I think is central to SaaS, and we're going to see, obviously, I think the profession's had a wee bit of a setback with the pandemic. It's clear that we did take a hit, but I think it's going to come back really strong as the economy picks up again. I think I think particularly when we start to really drive revenue in organizations, as we have many opportunities to do, I think the sky is the limit for customer success. And I really do think we will see more and more companies investing in this kind of capability. I think it's going to be unusual to see a SaaS company that doesn't do it. And we'll see it more broadly than SaaS, I'm sure, as we already are. You know, we're seeing it popping up in all sorts of places. Yeah,
we definitely have noticed that too. We've also had another question for just time for a quick one here. Just saying that somebody said that they're reading some data that shows that customer success teams in the US are increasingly starting to report directly into the CROs. And do you think you'll see this trend in the rest of the world, the UK, rest of the world?
So I have really mixed feelings about that. I personally disagree with it. I think customer success should report to a chief customer officer who should sit at the same level as the chief revenue officer. CRO brings companies into the organization, covers everything required to do that. Chief customer officer keeps them there, covers everything required to do that. Peer level relationship. I think there's a natural inclination to put customer success under the CRO because of this revenue angle. I think what happens though is that you end up with customer success teams that are driven towards revenue as their main objective and not driven towards customer value, customer outcomes, and making customers successful in the belief that that will deliver revenue for the organization. So you'll end up with them doing much more prospecting and sales support, et cetera, I think. Not always, because you're going to get enlightened CROs who don't fall into that trap. But so whether or not that becomes a dominant thing, I don't know. I see a lot of CCOs in the UK. I think we have, you know, we're quite well developed, I think, in delivering that role into organizations. So hopefully that's the way it's going to work. But for sure there will be teams reporting into CROs, and we'll see. So we tend to follow, don't we?
Yeah.
Well, maybe not so much these days, but we tend to follow the US a little bit.
Yeah, we do. Okay, thanks, Ian. That's great.
Okay, so how do I get there? So I mentioned some of this might be a little daunting, and I don't want this to seem, oh my God, that's crazy. What I want to try and show here is that there is enormous opportunity for you to look at how you're doing things as a customer success organization or a customer success leader, and think about how you can improve in many areas. Or, you know, checklist, yeah, we're already solid in that area, that's great, move on to the next one. There's a couple of areas. It's what we call capability, and we're going to talk about how capability is something that we would have on our revenue roadmap. So how do we get to be the most revenue generating organization as a customer success team we can be? Well, we've got to think about our capabilities as an organization, and then we've got to think about our performance. So for us, there are two aspects here. And when we talk about capability, there are a lot of things to think about. So obviously the CSM team is a key part of you having the right capability as an organization. Where are you in terms of hiring and onboarding? Is that optimized for you as an organization? This is one obviously that is particularly interesting for Gemma and Rob here, because working with a great agency is a great way to find great people. CSM development, once you've got them in the door, what are you doing to make sure that they stay at the very top of their game? Do you have a charter for customer success in your organization? Are the responsibilities of the CSM team clear and well defined? And can you, so essentially what we're saying here is you can benchmark yourself on each of these points. The next area of capability we would look at is scaling strategy. Do you have a strategy in place to scale the organization, scale customer success as the company scales? And have you thought about how you size your team as the company scales? If you're already growing, you know, do you have the right strategy in place? Are you making the appropriate moves to keep the team right sized? And then you can look at tooling. So customer success teams can use internal automation. They can use external automation. So tools internally that help them automate activities, tools that help them automate activities with customers. Appropriate health scoring, which obviously is really critical, because the better your health scoring, the more you can target activity well in advance of issues arising. And do you have the appropriate support tools, the likes of Gainsight, Client Success, and so on? Are you using an appropriate platform to help you, again, with some of the automation, some of the health scoring, but a way to bring together that full picture of the success of your customers? And alignment, is the company aligned around a customer success focus, or are you all pulling in different directions? And if you're in the red here, what can you do as a CSM team or leader to bring that back together into alignment? Is customer success seen as a philosophy in the organization, or is it just a function? So that's an aspect of alignment. And then business outcomes. Are you working off a defined customer success framework? Do you have a clearly defined customer success engagement? Is your customer journey clearly defined? Are clients onboarded in the best possible way? So again, very much around having the right capability in terms of artifacts, process, repositories, etc., to support your delivery of a business outcome or value-led customer success approach. And data and analytics, is the product built with outcomes in mind? Do you have the right analytics in your product to enable you to actually demonstrate to your customers that they're getting the maximum value from the use of the product? Many companies don't. And our dashboards provided for you as customer success, so you can quickly interrogate the status of your customers, maybe even dashboards provided for your customers themselves so they can see how well they're doing. So all of this fits into what we'd call capability. And every one of these areas is an area that you can inspect and you can figure out, are we doing the right things here? Is there more that we could be doing? Because anything that you improve here will show up in your ultimate performance and will show up in your results. So coming on to performance, what does that mean? So let's assume we've really got a capability well defined. We still have to make the most of that. So we still have to be outcomes led in the way that we talk with customers. We still have to be regularly demonstrating value. Our customers have to understand the value that they're getting delivered. Is that clear? Is that across the board? Do we have a way of representing value in a model? We have a value hierarchy at Success Methods, but do we have a way of representing value that allows us to talk really clearly with our customers about what to expect? If we're monetizing usage, what happens there? Do we have clear plans to monetize? Do we have clear ownership and who owns that in the organization? Is it customer success? Is it sales, etc., etc.? And then for expansion revenues, do we have a strategy? Are we properly aligned between customer success and sales around the activity needed? How do we do discovery? How do we surface opportunities? Do we have a lot of organic expansion? So how often do customers come to us because they're so happy and say, hey, we would like to buy some more? So again, there's a whole bunch of stuff here that we can look at in detail, and we can map out how well we're doing today against what we would consider to be the green, the best practice in each of those areas. And the same is true for customer satisfaction, which for us devolves into two areas: the stakeholders that you talk to regularly. You might do various surveys with them, but also the users who are often overlooked and not asked what they think about the solution. How are you doing that? And then finally, churn, your churn management processes, etc. Your renewals process, how effective is that? How crisp is it? How easy for the customer? And then in advocacy, what are you doing from the point of view of managing a program of advocacy, converting advocates, nurturing them, etc., etc. So all of these things are what we'd call performance. These are all things that relate to the execution of the customer success role to deliver the results for you and your customers that are expected by the organization. And again, we think you can dive in and you can really give yourself a score and then work with a plan to improve in each of these areas. So as I say, it's not meant to be scary. There's a lot there. There's a lot of detail. But we think these are all, the nice thing about this is these are all areas that potentially you can improve as an organization, or you can check mark and say, hey, we've really got that covered. Where else can we look to find opportunities to really drive what we're doing with the expectation that's going to lead to better revenue numbers at the end? So we're going to dive into a few of those in a little bit more detail, just to give you a flavor of what I mean by the kind of things that you'd look for when you were looking at each of these. But before we do that, let's just do one final poll and just ask you how much time you have as a customer success leader or team to actually spend on figuring out how to get better. It goes all the way from none because you literally haven't got a minute amongst putting out fires, to, you know, you've got all the time you need to really drive improvement. Or maybe even, you know, actually nobody's really asking us to get any better. We're fine as we are.
Thanks, Ian. There's so much there around what people can do to really twist the dial and turn the dials. There's so much. Where would you start though? Where is there one area on the previous slide that is the obvious place to look at for a quicker win, if you like, rather than a longer term strategy like advocacy for something like that?
That's a tricky one, Rob, because it depends where you are today. So where I would start with that is I would take a look at that, or some flavor of that, some sort of assessment-based approach to figure out where we're actually strong, where we're in need of improvement, and then try and figure out from those areas of improvement which of these is going to give us the biggest bang for our buck. And I think it's going to really depend by company, by customer base, by situation. It's a really tricky one to just say it's always going to be X or it's always going to be Y. I think if you forced me, I would go down something like the customer success framework piece. So really make sure you're able to execute consistently off a really well-defined framework, so everybody's clear on how to get a customer to optimum results as quickly as possible. I think that's probably a really high value thing if you're not doing it today.
Thank you.
But it's tough because if you're doing that, that's obviously the terrible answer, right? If you've already got that in place, it's somewhere else, the opportunity.
Yeah, I'm with you. Thank you. That's great. All right, we've got nearly everyone voted. So if you want to just put your last click of the mouse, just to put your thoughts in there around how much time you've got, and we'll just finish that poll and share that very, very shortly. In fact, I'll do that now.
And that's great. Nearly 80% of people on the call are actually able to spend time improving the customer success function. I think that's great. With, you know, a third making either good or excellent progress is really encouraging. I feel sorry for those of you who are firefighting the whole time. It's tough. That's a really difficult situation to be in. And I think it's one of these ones, if you are one of the 4 people who's answered firefighting, then I would recommend that you desperately find ways to start improving, because it will get you out of firefighting quicker than anything else to be automating the odd process or systemizing things that are currently not done to a defined process. It's tough though, I know. Okay.
Thank you guys for your input there this afternoon. Right, back to you, Ian.
Okay, so I said we'd drill down into a few areas. So I just want to drill into 3 on the capability side and 3 on the performance side. So we'll look at in a little more detail at what I would look at in terms of CSM responsibilities, CSM alignment, and product analytics to know, or to give me a sense of where we're well positioned, and also what I'd look at when it came to outcomes-led customer success, advocacy, nurturing, and the renewals process, again, to give me a sense as a CSM leader, are we in good shape in this particular area? And you can develop these kinds of assessments for every single one of these areas that I showed you. So if we look at the capability stuff, CSM responsibilities, clearly, you want those clearly documented so that everybody can access a really well understood description of what the role is, whether it's somebody doing it or somebody who's trying to get you to do something that isn't on it. It's really vital that the organization clearly understands the responsibilities of the role. Those should be aligned to your objectives. So there's no point having a set of responsibilities and being measured on a bunch of other stuff, right? So your objectives, your KPIs should be clearly aligned to those documented responsibilities. And all of this should be agreed at executive level. So the executive should be bought in to this in detail and absolutely supporting it, so that it becomes respected by other teams. So you don't get people trying to pull you off into all sorts of other activities or steal a bit of your time or not do the things that they're expected to do, because CSMs tend to be responsible and pick things up. So this should be respected by other teams, and it can't really be if it's not well understood and agreed at executive level. It's very difficult to get that to happen. And of course, then it should be consistently applied. So everybody should take those responsibilities and deliver accordingly. So those are some of the things that we would look at and use as a benchmark for how are we, when it comes to actually having CSM responsibilities from a capabilities point of view, really well nailed down. For CSM alignment, so we talked about this, customer success in our view should be a philosophy in the organization, not just a function, but it also obviously needs to be a function, meaning that all teams would be aligned around the idea that customer success outcomes or customer outcomes are why the company is there. So the product would be built in a way that really enables customer outcomes to be delivered. In the sales cycle, that would be front and center, so there'll be no smoke and mirrors. How many of you have inherited a customer who's been told a whole bunch of stuff that simply can't be done by the product? And I get that, you know, we're all businesses, we all have to stretch the truth a little bit, but actually the more that your sales organization is delivering in a way that's aligned to customer success outcomes that you then have to implement and deliver, the happier that customer is going to be, the more likely they are to renew and the more likely they are to buy more in the long run. I believe that all teams in the organization should have some customer metrics that they're measured on. If you're one of the few companies, I think, that's in the fortunate position of being able to measure the true value that you deliver to your customers, that's something I think could be part of everybody's KPIs. Are we actually, as an organization, all focused on delivering customer value? You also want a clear internal customer journey. So we talked earlier about the customer journey. We think of that as being the journey the customer goes on in their own organization to get to their value. But obviously there's a journey that they go along in your organization as they pass from team to team to team. Making that as clear, as crisp, as well handed over as possible is obviously vital. And we would like to see executives engaged with customers. So we think that that really shows that your executive are really aligned around customer success principles if they're spending a lot of time with engaging with customers. So in this one, this is some of the stuff again that we would look at. And if you'd like more on that, the webinar we mentioned earlier on goes into this area in a great deal of detail. So you can find that on our website and also on the 90,000 Hours website. And then we'll finish on one final capability. I think we might then take a question or two, and then we'll just take a look at the performance side of things. So I'll do this one a little bit quicker because I don't want to labor these points. But for product analytics, we would like to see outcomes-led product development. We would really like to see you have customer product councils, so your customers are fully bought in and able to participate in the development process. Customer outcomes tracked from an analytics perspective, dashboards provided to CSM, and customer success dashboards. So customers able to see on their own dashboard just how successful they're being and how successful your joint work is being in delivering them more value. So just take that quick question that's there, Gemma. I think there might be one or two. Shall we just take a question or two and then?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, we've got some questions. We've actually had some good questions coming in, and Matt's answered them as we've gone along. So
okay,
we can go back to those. But we've got one here, which is: can you share your views on what should be the top metric for each different engagement teams? Those teams being high touch, low touch, tech touch, and support. What will be your top metric for each one?
Ooh, that's a really interesting and good question. You know, honestly, for all of the customer success facing teams, in the end, with the exception of support, but for the strategic, mid-market, high-touch customer success teams, for me, the critical metric is net retention. So not churn, not expansion revenues. The combination of the two, net retention for me is the critical one. I like it for two reasons. One is it's why you're there. It genuinely measures your fundamental value to the organization, which is your ability to contribute revenue. And it's because it's net retention, it's typically a number that's larger than 100%. So if you're talking about retention, you're always talking about the 10% you didn't hang on to. If you're talking about 110% net retention, you're talking about your positive contribution to the organization. So for me, it's the most important measurement for customer success teams because it gets to retention and expansion. For support, I'm not sure that I would go with that. I think probably a really good measure of customer satisfaction with the support that they receive from the support organization is what I would go for. Okay, great question though. Nice when you've got to think about. Should have that kind of answer off Pat. That's a great question.
Matt, do you agree, or have you got anything to add?
No, I tend to agree with Ian. I think the only thing I may add is, regardless of the segment that a customer's in, broadly you should be trying to achieve the same thing. You just may do it in a slightly different way. But I agree with Ian that net retention would be the way to do that. You just may end up getting to it in a different way for each of those different segments.
Okay, so thank you, Matt. We'll just quickly jump into performance. So again, I'm going to do these relatively quickly because the point isn't to labor it, it's just to give you a sense of where you can look. So if you're looking at outcomes led, by which we mean the customer success team puts at the forefront of conversations with customers the delivery of the value associated with the outcomes that they've bought your product for. So obviously you want your product to be thinking, your product teams to be thinking about how you enable that. But you really want a framework, a library, or repository of all the ways that you have seen and all the ways that you would recommend customers can achieve outcome value and ultimately ROI with you as an organization. Your best practices should be aligned to driving those outcomes. You obviously want clear measurements for every outcome you're trying to work with in this way. And that can be difficult to achieve, particularly when you get up to ROI. But the more you can work with your product team to ensure that you have control of measurement and can clearly demonstrate to customers what they are achieving with your platform, the better the position that you're in. And where you can't, you may need to rely on your customer to share some of their data. That's much easier done if you're really putting value and ROI at the heart of the conversation, because they'll understand why you want it. And outcomes led at every customer. So do this consistently. As Matt was saying, you may do it differently in terms of how you deliver it, depending upon the segment, but your objective should be to take an outcomes-led approach with every customer. And if you want more on this, our second webinar, the value-based approach to measurement for customer success, has a lot of material that you might find helpful in looking at some of this stuff. And then let's look at renewals. So you would understand why churn is happening. You should really have a clear understanding. Occasionally something's going to blindside you, but you should have a really clear understanding of why churn occurs, because you can then use an appropriate form of health scoring to predict churn, which will let you get active churn management processes in place. So in an ideal world, churn is the exception because you're never surprised that it's coming. And so you have plenty of time to get ahead of it and work with the customer to find solutions to the issues or whatever it happens to be. And we do work with customers who are in the high 90s, very high 90s for churn, or for retention. So this is possible. Obviously harder in some industries and in others, and the more competition there is, etc., etc. But nonetheless, you can do a lot to get ahead of churn. And as we've said, I'd forgotten I had that bullet point, but CSM is measured on net retention. I think that's critical, and I would be very tempted to measure broader parts of the organization on that, because it changes the incentives for people if they're measured on net retention versus some of the other ways that we measure other teams in the organization. And then finally, for advocacy, so have a program, actually have a plan to drive advocacy via the customer success organization. And that would include things like actually mapping and identifying advocates by needs. So we need 6 speakers this year, we need 12 case studies, we need to do 20 references. So who might be the people who could fulfill those things for us? And once you've got that, then have the advocate conversion of those individuals that you've identified owned by the customer success team, who would use identified nurturing steps that you've agreed on as an organization in order to ultimately deliver those advocates into your advocacy program, with some appropriate metric in place to enable you to actually track that contribution. Most people aren't doing this. It's a really untapped opportunity for customer success to add a stack of value without adding a stack of overhead. That's the interesting thing about this. Once you've got your plan in place, actually it just becomes part of business as usual. So it's a nice one for people to think about how they could add a lot more value if they're not doing it today. Right, we'll have a quick pit stop and then we'll just talk about a couple of little things which will bring us to the conclusion of the formal part of the content.
Thank you, Ian. That's amazing. I think the advocacy point is so pertinent. I mean, it's been tried and tested, and we use it in recruitment all the time. We call it referrals, referral based business, and pushing that and getting people to champion your business in front of others and things. It's so powerful. So I think if an organization can move towards that end of the scale and start to really be at that end, they're theoretically should be winning, should be starting to move the boat faster and further, which is superb. So guys, thank you for staying with us. That I think when towards the end now, if you've got any questions, please do fire them in. We will be writing up some notes and a report, and that will be available to everyone tomorrow. I'll send you an email, and that will have a copy of the recording, and it will have a copy of the report as well. But we'll hang around for 5-10 minutes to answer any questions. It doesn't have to be about today. It doesn't have to be about revenue. It does have to be about customer success, but it can be about anything. So we've got Ian and Matt here, Gemma and myself. So it could be recruitment related, people related. We haven't mentioned relationships a lot today, but I know that moving towards that advocacy model, the strength of the relationship that you have with your customer is going to be key as well. So having the right personnel in place is very, very important. But look, if you need to head on, then
Rob, we're not finished. We're not finished, mate.
Oh,
sorry,
we're not?
that was it.
Oh,
No,
okay.
that was an opportunity to take some questions, but we have a few more slides, so hopefully we've not.
Oh well, thanks for cutting me in then. Okay, I'll let you carry on.
So this, I think we'll just move on because I think we can take questions at the end now. We're almost there. So making this happen, what would you do? So there's a great saying attributed to General MacArthur, which is have a good plan, execute it violently, and do it today. And I think while I don't necessarily agree with the violence in that quote, I do think that having a good plan, going after it robustly and not waiting is the way to get things done whenever possible. So I would suggest that you look at, as we've kind of talked through here, but you look at where might be the opportunities for you to bolster either your capability or your performance. We talked through 6 in a little detail. There are about 40 on that, on those 2 slides in total. And make an action plan. Don't try and bite off too much. Pick a few areas, get into the habit of doing this. And those of you who are, reported that you were spending some or a good amount of time on this, I'm sure are doing this already. But for me, it's about making a prioritized list of actions based on a really clear idea of where you can improve and going after them. And then make sure you have a framework in place so that you can actually measure your success as a customer success team. And I would recommend, if you haven't really got this in place today and you're not satisfied with the way that you're measured as a customer success team, to sit down as a team or a leader and actually define the metrics that you believe should measure the success of you as a contributor to your overall business. Agree those with your executives, so actually sit down with a plan, present to them, this is why we should make a change, or this is why we should introduce something we don't have. For example, it might be to go from churn to net retention. Get that agreed if you can. Take a new baseline. Obviously, if you're changing something, take a new baseline and measure and iterate on that so that you can, over time, hopefully, if you've defined some actions and you've begun to do things to try and increase those 1% increments that we talked about and start keeping a bit more revenue in the company or expanding a bit more year on year, you'll start to see the improvements as you measure those metrics. So I would definitely recommend, if you don't have it already, that you set out your ideal world metrics for customer success in terms of delivering value for your customers. Agree those with your exec and get them in place as soon as possible. Too many teams are measured on things that don't make sense or aren't really aligned with what they're trying to do, and I think it doesn't really fairly recognize you or compensate you for your efforts. And I think a good case can be therefore made to executives who will understand the impetus behind it for change. So that's the final piece. We are kind of at final Q&A. If anybody does have any final questions on any of this, now is your chance. We've got 10 minutes or so to work through them.
Thanks, Ian. Yeah, we've got lots of questions. We'll start with an interesting one, actually, going back to advocacy that we were just talking about. If you are a low average order value business, how can you generate advocacy?
So the first thing that I would do in that situation is I would sit down with my marketing team and ask them what they need to drive that kind of customer into the organization. And that will tell you whether or not you have an opportunity to generate those kind of advocates. It's going to be tough, right? You're not spending a lot of time with customers if you're low value, high volume. I appreciate that is tricky. But I think the important point is they may say to you, look, we could do with 3 or 4 of these, we could do with 3 or 4 of these, we could do with 3 or 4 of these. Working together with that marketing team, you might then be able to identify, well, so those customers would be ideal for the case studies. Those customers would be ideal for references. Those customers would be ideal to speak at events. We will, as a company, invest a little more effort in them in order to build the necessary relationships so we can generate that advocacy off the back. So rather than it become something you're trying to fit into every engagement, which would not be practical in a high volume organization, it becomes something that you focus on with a very targeted and narrow segment of your customer base where you can justify a little more investment to build the relationships and hope to generate the advocacy, but done knowing that it's what your marketing team are crying out for from the customer.
That makes sense. Thank you. We've also got a question which is around metrics, which we kind of covered in the measurement webinar, but it does apply here. What advice would you give if your customers are really difficult to get success metrics from?
Customers are difficult to get success.
Either they don't want to give you the information and perhaps you can't put it into your product or your platform.
Yeah, so we get asked this a lot. I think it's a great question. It's a real challenge for customer success teams, I think, because customers are often wary about sharing that information. And for me, the answer is kind of twofold. One is to put value at the heart of the conversation you have with the customer and demonstrate as much as you can. So you will have some metrics, you'll have some analytics capability, there'll be something you can talk about, and make the point that you could do so much more together if you had additional insight, but that insight can only come if they work in a more partnerly type fashion with you. Mm-hmm. And smart customers will understand that argument because they'll know that if ultimately they want to get more value, they may have to be prepared to share a little more with you in order for you to see whether or not what you're doing together is generating results. So I'd put value at the heart of the conversation. I'd demonstrate what I can, and I would then show the opportunity that's not being capitalized on as a result of us not having access to some of the data we'd need to see whether or not we could actually make progress.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thanks, Ian. That's great. We've also got a question around expansion opportunities. This is an interesting one about structure. Who should own them? Who should own those opportunities? Should it be customer success or sales?
So again, great question. I think it depends on a few things. For me, there's no right and wrong answer there, I don't think. So for example, it depends on the size of the opportunity. If it's 3 extra seats the customers asked for, why would you involve sales? Mm. If it's 1,000 seats for a brand new department, why would you let customer success anywhere near it, right? So it really depends on the opportunity. You know, sales have a real skill set around selling. customer success have a real skill set around delivering value, relationships, etc. And I prefer not to over confuse them, but depending upon what you're doing, there are times where it's just going to be obvious it should be customer success. There are times it's going to be obvious it should be sales. And when it's not obvious, that's where we get back to that CSM responsibilities piece, right? We have that defined by the executive. What is it actually we should do in this grey area where it's not a big opportunity that clearly needs a sales cycle and therefore a professional sales person, and it's not a little one where the customer just wants a small upsell and they don't even want to negotiate on price, in which case CSM can do it, that gap in the middle. So yeah, I think that's there might be some black and white there, but there's a lot of grey in the middle, and I think the company as a whole needs to sit down and figure that one out. Yeah,
okay, I think that's true. It's also about whether you hire CSMs with sales skills, or you kind of split the team that way. There's all different ways to do it.
Yeah, in fact, that CRO thing, isn't it? Of having the CRO being the person who leads the team, and I think in companies like that, you'll get more of an emphasis on CSM selling. Which fundamentally it worries me a bit, because there's then less of an emphasis on customer success, which in the longer term isn't why you're there, but in the end you are there to drive revenue. So maybe it's tricky.
Yeah,
you kind of go around in circles in that one a bit.
Definitely, and lots of questions around this now, actually, just coming in on a similar point. So somebody asking, at what point should a CSM get involved with customers? Before the deal is signed? Once the deal is signed, onboarding, what's the point they should take over?
So again, I think that varies. So go back to your low volume, high touch. After the deal is signed, right? For sure. You don't want the CSMs in the sales cycle for high volume, low touch clients. You don't want CSMs in the sales cycle at all. If you are selling a $5 million deal to a strategic client, you probably do want your customer success manager, and one of your best ones, in that sales cycle, talking in detail about how you're going to make that customer a huge success, unless that can be covered absolutely perfectly by the sales team. But even then, they sometimes can lack the credibility because they're seen differently by the customer.
Yeah, exactly.
So again, depends. I'm not averse at all to CSM getting involved in the sales cycle, but as a strategic resource to progress opportunities, not as a pair of hands to get things done.
Yeah, okay. Agreed. Any advice that you have around if a company's got a really wide spread of customers between low touch and high touch? Have you got any advice around creating a kind of a traditional have you got any advice around creating different levels of touch points with those different types of clients? I'm trying to rephrase the question, which is clearly not going well.
That's fine. I'm reading.
Read the question. You probably see it, Ian.
Yeah. I've got it here. That's a really interesting question. Never been asked that before. I'm going to dodge it and say that's a situation I would like to look at in more detail, because I'm not sure you should ever need more than 4 touch levels, simply because of the overhead of actually managing that. But don't know the customer, and it could be you genuinely got such a wide range, it's very hard to put them in 4 buckets. One thing I would say to the questioner is that we think of segmentation less as being around we have to segment, how shall we do it, and more around why should we segment in terms of how will we treat the customers differently. So if you've got more than 4 groups of customers who all need to be treated differently, versus the value spread is so wide, then it's one thing. But if it's just about the value spread, think about it through the lens of how would we actually want to treat those customers, and that may compress your groups for you a little bit. Okay, I think we're done. 1 minute to 2.
Thank you, Ian.
That is fantastic. So I'll just quickly wrap up, because I do want to keep to the timescale. But I'm just going to start by saying thank you to Ian and Matt. That was fantastic. Thank you so much, and thank you to everyone for staying with us till the end. If you have got any questions, of course you can reach out to Ian or Matt or myself on LinkedIn. We're all quite vocal on LinkedIn. Go find us, connect with us, or you can. Any last minute questions, send them through now, and we will answer them by email back to you tomorrow or something like that. But I just want to say again, thank you so much from all of us today for being with us. I hope you got some value from that. I hope it has really helped, and hope that next year for everyone is going to be a really, really positive one. So good luck to everyone out there. I'll see you soon.